What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Ravens Watch. I am your host, David Lee Corbo, aka The Raven. And before we get started, I just wanted to go over a little bit of a business thing. Just to remind everyone, Nephilim Death Squad is going to be exclusively streaming on the Nephilim Death Squad channel. So for those of you who have been catching it on the Ravens Watch or on Top Lobster or even the Tower Gang crew, do me a favor, go ahead and subscribe to Nephilim Death Squad on YouTube as well as Rumble. If you want to do us even further, what I would suggest is subscribing to the Rumble. The Rumble, because we are going to eventually try to move away from YouTube and make Nephilim Death Squad an exclusive over there. If you haven't already done so, you can head over to toplobster.com where we have all of our Nephilim Death Squad merch. We just came out with a really awesome line, t-shirts, hats, all that good stuff, jackets and hoodies. So go and check that kind of stuff out. If you're a fan of the show or you know somebody who is, I might go as far as saying that Nephilim Death Squad merch would make an awesome Christmas gift. So let's get out of the business and let's get into today's guest. I actually heard this gentleman on Tinfoil Hat, and I was fascinated by the information that he presented. So let's go ahead and bring him up. Today's guest is Miguel Connor. Miguel, before we get into what today's topic is going to be about, could you please let the audience know where they can find your work?
Probably the best place is thegodabovegod.com. That's where I have my podcast, books, articles, yada, yada, yada. So social media and all that good stuff, courses. Thegodabovegod.com.
So, Miguel, I actually saw your episode on Tinfoil Hat, like I was saying a moment ago. And when it comes to celebrities, there are sort of a hierarchy of celebrities, right? There are people who are familiar when it comes to the public eye, but then there are like these mega stars and people that sort of ascend uh your typical celebrity sphere into something that is like culture moving, a permanent fixture in, Americana, for example. In this particular episode, I'm hoping that we can talk quite a bit about Elvis Presley. And one of the things that I found very fascinating, at least an aspect of your episode of Tinfoil Hat, was that Elvis seems to be synonymous with like esoteria, with this idea of the supernatural, even. Um, and I think that there are some celebrities that come along that, like I just mentioned, they ascend beyond your typical public awareness sphere. They're beyond your famous talk show host or anything like that. These are superstars, megastars. I would even say it's beyond superstars, right? Because a superstar is name a famous musician, and then there are these permanent fixtures in American culture that kind of live on and echo on forever. Elvis Presley being one of these people, and I would be totally fascinated if we can go down that role. So wherever you want to begin with Elvis is up to you, but I'll let you take it away, Miguel.
Well, I have a book coming out probably in about a year called America's Magician: The Gnostic, Occult, and Shamanistic Life of Elvis Presley. Tentatively, the publisher might change the title before it's over, or the tagline. And I take it even further, what you're saying. I mean, obviously, Elvis is the greatest cultural music item or figure icon of America. He's the number one highest selling solo artist. You'd have to, maybe Michael Jackson, maybe Prince are far back as far as American, and even he's up there with the Beatles. And truly, and he changed culture. He was the, you might say, Pied Piper or shaman or figure that was part of America's change from a sort of republic suffering through the Depression and World War II into this new post-war America, this Eisenhower America, this America of UFOs and science fiction and nuclear warfare threats and fights against communism, but this America that was richer than any country had ever been and an empire that the world had never seen. I mean, as Chris Knowles has shown in his series, Lucifer's Technology, you've got the Sumerians, you got, civilization, the Sumerians, this civilization just pops out of nowhere. No scholar, anthropologist understands how this happened, right? And then humanity's kind of going and we're building and we're inventing as we go. And suddenly we get after World War II and pop. And this is all, scientific curves. Suddenly technology is just flying from the sky, from Americans, from Japanese, everywhere. Something happened and it was a brave new world, a completely different world. And Elvis sort of represents this sort of bombastic, consumerist, uh, extroverted, but also multicultural. I'm going to throw different cultures in, and he is America, as a critic said. He's the best and the worst of America. He's the mirror to each of us. And I know people are talking about, well, what is America in these strange times? But I think there is something called an American culture, and it's Elvis. And I go even farther. I say he's not just a musician who got into the esoterica. He is the musician that got into the esoterica, and he's the greatest magician of modern times. More than Crowley, more than John Dee, more than Jack Parsons. And I make my case, and I'd love somebody to push back on this, but he was steeped into the occult. He would travel wherever he want, Vegas, Hollywood. He would hire a group of workers to carry around 200 books on the occult. And in between shows and parties and shooting television sets and all that, he would just sit there and just absorb these books and have these circles where he would practice meditation, yoga, and all that. He was an adept of Yogananda. He visited the center there in California. He was a theosophist. He was into secret societies. He was into the Book of Enoch, Gnostic Gospels, you name it. That if there was literature back in the early 60s, he was into it. He was into the I Ching, Buddhism. It didn't matter. He was into it. And most of the world has no idea about this. And again, there's a lot of conspiracies about Elvis, but I take this from the horse's mouth. This is from the biographies of Priscilla Presley, from his friends, from family, from the Memphis Mafia, from Colonel Parker. They all saw this, but somehow there was some energy. Nobody wanted to understand it. And they still see Elvis as this like good old boy, Southern Christian guy, but he wasn't. And he was a natural mystic. He could heal people at touch, from heart attacks to headaches. He had this amazing power. He had out of body experiences. He could manipulate matter. He had several very grand mystical experience. He had several UFO encounters, and he was just an all around Renaissance man, mystic, magician. And he had prophetic powers. And in my book, I just go, I mean, over and over all the instances of the things he did: read people's minds, control people's emotions. I mean, it almost makes sense when you think about how, this, 18-year-old truck driver going to electrician school walked into a studio and then within a year was the biggest phenomenon that the country had ever seen as far as entertainment.
Yeah, that is an interesting thing that somehow has slipped my radar, and I think you spoke to it a moment ago, where the country's image of Elvis was very much associated with this good old boy Christian, right? And everyone who follows sort of the occult or looks into it would pretty much agree. The consensus is there that within the music industry, there is a ton of occultism. And you don't have to look very far. I mean, modern day artists are certainly an indication of this, but going back to the Beatles, they have become synonymous with occultism, with esoteria, with psychedelic use, with Crowley, even. And somehow, based off of what you're saying, it sounds like there is an argument that, and very much you're making that Elvis was the prime example of this. And
Yeah,
yet,
way before them. Way before them. Yeah.
Right, and yet his name is not synonymous in the cultural zeitgeist with occultism, at least not amongst the layman's, right? And amongst the layman's, you could get pretty much you could ring out of any normal person on the street like, "Hey, were the Beatles into some strange stuff?" "Oh, yeah. Yeah, the Beatles were definitely into some strange stuff, for sure." But, it's even escaped my radar until I've had a very very, very peripheral knowledge, very small on the edges of my awareness, was this idea that Elvis was into the occult. But certainly not the case with other artists. And would you maintain that that is because of the maybe the image that American culture painted of him made it uncomfortable for the average person to venture there, or maybe because of the religious standpoint of America at the time, it was not conducive to he would not have been well received if his public image was that of being an occultist.
That's hard to say. I keep going back and forth. Was the world just not ready? Because again, it's right there. Priscilla used to say he could heal her headaches at a touch. He healed his grandmother's arthritis in front of people. He would get his bodyguards and friends and sit and have these circles of meditation and summonings and these very intricate ceremonial magic. He obviously always had some girl with him, and half of the sometimes they didn't even sleep together. He would have her like read these books and do these chants and prayers. So it wasn't a guarded secret. It annoyed people. In fact, his family and friends were like, "Oh God damn it!" They wanted to party and have all the materialistic stuff that came with Elvis, and they were like, "We don't want the spirituality and inner world stuff." So it's interesting that people didn't it didn't come out. I mean, of course, like I said, there was a whole conspiracy theory of Elvis and what he did in the 70s, 80s in tabloids, but it was so corny and cheesy, people just accepted it, but nobody took it seriously. That might have helped because then people just wouldn't believe anything extra crazy about Elvis. Did he live? Was he an alien? Even though he did say he did tell a groupie once that he was from the ninth moon of Jupiter or something like that. So it's I think maybe the world is ready. I almost like to be romantic and say that America's culture is under attack, and Elvis might be the solution because Elvis is American, but his being American was always being inclusive. You know, he dated black girls in the 50s and the 40s, and he almost got killed by the sheriff for doing that. He believed in different types of music and putting them together. He saw everybody as equal, and he loved all parts of every culture, but he thought the American culture was American culture. There was something you could feel it, and there was an attitude, and it was so he was what really American culture should be: innovation, syncretism and technology and art, being kind to others, and all that. Plus, the truth is, he really was a Jesus freak, what but not as people thought he was, only as they saw him. For example, when he came out in the 50s, people forget that his fame was also so controversial. I mean, pastors like Billy Graham, his own pastor, turned on him and said, "You are of the devil." And people in the government and the status quo, including Frank Sinatra, hated him with a passion because he was liberating people's mind, and women were coming to the sexual and intellectual and emotional freedom because of Elvis. And he was bringing this new syncretic culture where you could use Hispanic and black music and gospel, and everything counted. And he was really hated by a big portion of the country. And he was very hurt because he was raised very a Pentecostal Christian. So he was all about Jesus, but not the Jesus of the Protestant or even Catholic tradition. This was more of a shake your body and let the Holy Spirit come into you, and go into an altered state of mind and spend hours playing guitar and dancing in your churches. And a lot of the country hated Pentecostals because they said they were mixing sex and salvation in the South, and they were. I mean, and Elvis just kind of brought this shamanistic Pentecostal stuff out, just like Johnny Cash did, just like Lee Lewis did, just like BB King did, and then they called it rock and roll. A lot of people who would go to rock concerts in the late 50s would like this is like a tent revival, except instead of Holy Spirit, you've switched it to baby or love. They said it's the same kind of thing we see in Southern black churches and white churches. But he was really hurt by how churches and pastors turned on him, so he became very resentful against Christianity. But he still sort of kept Jesus to himself, and also he was so famous he could no longer go to church, so he had to like do Bible studies at home or something like that. But in the 60s, he met his spiritual advisor, who gave him books like gave him several books on theosophy, sort of Freemason books and all that. And he discovered the idea of the cosmic Christ, or Christ being a wise ascended master. And he was off to the races because he was like, this makes perfect sense. We all have Jesus in our hearts. We have a Christ consciousness, and we can bring it out, and all of us can become divine. He read the Gospel of Thomas from the Gnostics. And he also thought that this makes perfect sense, that there's these ascended masters of the White Brotherhood like Buddha, Zoroaster, Muhammad, and Jesus was just one in a long line of these wise masters. And he really thought, maybe I'm one of those masters too, because I'm so famous, I can sort of spread this. There were times in concerts when he would read like Blavatsky poetry to his audience, but for the most part, he thought it was just his music. He wanted his music to inspire people to see God and the best version of themselves. And if you see his shows, again, it was like a Holy Spirit tent revival or shamanistic ritual, where he would get into the crowd and have women kiss him and touch him like he was, uh, Bacchus in the Bacchus mysteries or something like that. And he would kiss children, and women would ask to heal him and put his hands on him. So he really felt that A, we all had a Christ consciousness, there was a cosmic Christ, and B, everybody had a purpose and could become a great master to change history. So people outward saw him talking about Jesus, but they didn't know that inside he was talking about this very different Jesus, this Jesus of the Gnostics. The Gnostics were that way 2,000 years ago. The church fathers would go up to them as like, do you believe in Jesus and this and that? And they go, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then they'd go do their secret rituals, in the back rooms, because, you know, pearls for swine. You give people, if they're ready, they can come to you for deeper questions. So I think that's it. Various reasons why we don't see the Elvis we want to see. But his clothing is based on a lot of old masters people don't know. It's based on Captain Marvel. There's hints all over the place that he was just a big mystic.
One of the things that really speaks to, in my opinion, Elvis having this sway over people, right? You're describing his music as being like a sort of a church experience. And I don't know that we have this anymore. Maybe gone are the days of celebrities with this much cultural influence. Um, and certainly you could say that all of the sort of occult mixing with celebrities was that door was opened by Elvis based off of what you're saying. And as far as his ability to impact people, point to someone now that would have women wetting themselves, weeping and fainting. I mean,
And they still are. I went to Graceland, and at his grave, I spent a lot of time because the energy, and I noticed every woman, no matter her age, that sat in front of his grave started crying. It was like they couldn't help it. So he
that's
was.
crazy. I would not have guessed that he still had that, especially over a generation that had no experience with him. But I suppose that does speak to there's something else going on there. Um, I would be very interested in hearing about some of the things that people claim to experience in the presence of Elvis, because it's my understanding, based off of me listening to you, that there was a fair bit of UFO experiences. You were alluding before to this idea of him being able to read people's minds on occasion, that there's stories of him healing. That's something that we touched on multiple times. And I find it fascinating, right? I don't know if it's this idea of, I'm sure you're familiar with the idea of indigo children, right? There's like indigo children is, something that was popularized, I believe, in the 80s and 90s, um, that some almost like star children or star seeds,
Right.
this idea that some people are born maybe with an extrasensory ability or a stronger connection to this, maybe like this consciousness that you're describing or that he talked about. Um, and that I had a guest on my show previously. Her name is Cheney, and she talked about people like Selena and Princess Diana that are like these massive cultural movers that have this innate ability to connect to people on a level that um the average person can't. And based off of what you're saying about Elvis, it sounds very parallel to that. He had an ability to reach people on such a level that it was indescribable. It didn't make sense, at least not from where we stand, right? Without all this potential knowledge that Elvis had. What sorts of experiences um, are you aware of that people were having in the presence of Elvis?
Oh, so many. I mean, first it should be said, I mean, everything pointed to Elvis being Elvis once you put it all together. We couldn't get it all in this show, but for example, when he was born in this little shack in Tupelo, Mississippi. And I went after Graceland, I went down to Mississippi. I went to Clarksdale, Mississippi to the crossroads where Robert Johnson made a deal with the devil. Because there's parallels with Elvis and Robert Johnson both died the same day on the same day and whatever. And there's some sort of animistic, strange spiritual power over in Memphis and Mississippi. But he was born in a little shack, and his twin brother died. Came out 30 minutes earlier and died. But before that, his father was outside having a cigarette because they were so poor they had to have the twins at home. And A blue light came, like a blue light appeared over the house, and everything went quiet, and no sounds of coyotes or birds. And Vernon, his father, freaked out and ran in, and sort of, then of course his poor child was dead and so forth. So he forgot about that. And Vernon even says later, he's like, I remember 9 months before Elvis was dying, I was having sex. He was being pretty open, and he blacked out. And that's interesting because it doesn't happen. People blacking out in an orgasm is actually very rare. I mean, even the tantric masters can't do it. So there's all these little hints, and his mother always had this second sight vision. She had premonitions. They say she could see spirits. I don't know if it's from Elvis's. Some say he had Cherokee blood. Some say he had some sort of Kabbalistic Jewish blood. We don't know because the records were not very good back then, especially in the South, because the world had forgotten about the South. It was a terrible. It wasn't a good place. But there was all these hints about Elvis and his second sight and all that. So he uh, he just had this ability. Some people could say, I mean, so many people met him. He could predict what you were going to say and what you were going to feel in the future and get it right. He could change the mood of the room by whatever way he felt like it. He could read the room better than anybody. We all have friends or something. They can read the room. They know who's who, what's the party going to be about, and he could do it better than anybody. And once he got into the occult, sometimes he could do it for the better, to help people, heal people, not just physically, but also mentally. But sometimes, if he got into one of his dark moods, especially towards later of his career when he was just doing a lot of drugs and his sanity was starting to crack, his physical health was cracking, he could do some bad things to people. I mean, there's like the story where he was convinced that well, he wasn't convinced it's true. Priscilla was having an affair with her karate teacher, Mike Stone, who was an adept of Chuck Norris, I believe. And he wanted him, and these people attacked Elvis on stage. And the bodyguards got all the attackers except one guy. And the guy had a scabbard, but no sword, but he was attacking Elvis. And Elvis, what people don't know is he had like 4 karate belts. So all Elvis had to do was one roundhouse kick, and this guy went flying. I mean, Elvis was deadly with his hands. The things, even you go to Graceland, you see things that he broke, and your jaw will drop because it's not human. He was known precision and force. He was just martial arts, he was just incredible. And also, he was always armed to the teeth. I mean, even at his shows, he might have 4 guns on him. Even when he flew commercial, he would let, like, agents, he'd write them notes and stuff, autographs if they let him on planes with guns. It's like, he was always armed to the teeth. So he went, when he found after the show he was attacked, he was convinced that Mike Stone was trying to kill him. So he's storming across his room angry. He goes and he grabs a machine gun. He gives it to one of his bodyguards and he said, "You go kill Mike Stone right now before he kills me." And the bodyguard is like, "Elvis, don't you want to think about it?" And he looks into his eyes, and the bodyguard was like, "Oh no, he's using this mind power. I'm starting to feel my willpower." And people like stopped him and it was interrupted, but the guy really freaked out. And then after a day, Elvis is like, "Yeah, like Tony Soprano. Yeah, forget about it. We'll let this one go." So there were so many instances like that. And yeah, many appear in my book and many, many more I'm finding out. I mean, he knew about his death. There's so many conversations and hints that he knew it was his time to go. His death was probably not accidental. When you look at the way he died, it's more like it was almost this sort of shaman, Egyptian priest ritual, rather than, an accidental death of a guy crapping on the toilet. And he told people 2 days before, he told his stepbrother, he said, "I am leaving to another plane." And his brother thought he meant airplane. He's like, "Yeah, we got to go to Oregon. You better be on that plane." And Elvis was like, "Forget about it, but I will be on another plane." And he told friends and all that. So he was operating on several different dimensions than most of us are.
We always see the decline of. I also do want to mention that that's not the only case I'm aware of like that. Tupac um, seemed to be very much into his coming death, and they wrote a song, I believe, "Ghost," where I know a lot of the song was about a previous attempt on his life, but it seems like within that song there's a lot of alluding to, and it might even be the backbone for the conspiracy theory that Tupac faked his own death in order to avoid his enemies. He also referenced constantly Prince Machiavelli, who is famous for writing a book on essentially war tactics. And one of the tactics was this idea of faking your own death, basically until your enemies were no longer an issue and then returning. And so he called himself Machiavelli, often alluded to this idea of the Illuminati being after him, trying to kill him. And so, and then of course, he ends up dying. And if you listen to the song Ghost, there's a lot of parallels to, uh, you know, at least things that would make you feel like he was sort of having premonitions or predicting his own death. Um, but when it comes to Elvis, there's a lot of celebrities, big celebrities. Unfortunately, towards the end, we often do see them spiral. Right? There is a dark chapter to our most beloved celebrities and their public personas. And I imagine that you can explain that away in a lot of uh how would you put it, sort of standard ways, like the stresses of celebrity in general, right? Or like you said, his getting into heavy drug usage, which speaks to the temptations of being a high level celebrity. I'm sure everyone is offering you something every corner you turn, and so it becomes very hard to avoid these sorts of things, and I think that they do contribute to this darker aspect. But when you have a character like Elvis, who's intrinsically tied into the occult, into the spiritual realm, and he now starts making a turn towards the dark, well, then I would imagine that his relationship with the occult and with spirituality also begins to take a dark turn. Is there much that you know about in the way of Elvis and how his relationship with this occult, esoteric, supernatural aspect of things, the spiritual realm, how that relationship begins to manifest maybe in a dark way?
No, not with Elvis. I mean, I think in around 76, 77, before he passed, he was doing some sex magic with his fiancee, but it was based on like hermetic old text. And there was nothing nefarious. I mean, some of your viewers might say any sex magic is evil, but again, that's just perspective, right? But there was nothing like that. No, he was always searching. He was trying to always reading new books, trying new forms of meditation, whether it was Eastern or Greek Orthodox. You know, it was a, as he wrote in one book, it's all about self knowledge. That's the most important thing. He wanted to find out more about himself and his role in the universe and make contact with God, with higher forms of consciousness. So I don't think there was anything, no, definitely anything bad. I mean, he was a very open-minded person. The only religion that he hated was Scientology, and he was very open about that. But he always thought all religions are trying to find God. They're trying to find their place in the universe, and all religions and their leaders and masters have something to contribute to the overall human consciousness. So I can't, no, I would say not that way. And he was never into, I think he obviously read like the White Brotherhood, and he agreed with it that Crowley was one of the special masters, but he never read really any Thelema, even though he was into numerology, even though he was into astrology, and he thought of the whole, you know, Atlantis stuff. He was into that, and ancient alien and all that. But no, he was always, I can't see anything dark as far as his spiritual quest.
You don't know much about what his because it just seems like, um, and I'm just stating the obvious at this point. Elvis was a seeker, right? This is his maybe one of his main drives was trying to understand the universe. Why else would you reach into all these different boxes, whether it's Greek Orthodox or any of these various the Hermetic principles? What did you ever come across maybe a conclusion or a theory that surmised what he suspected these aliens were? Because he does seem to have also an interest in UFOs and aliens and things of that nature. Um, did he ever talk much at length about what he suspected they were, the nature of them?
Yeah, he had plenty of ideas, like all of us. And I mean, he had read, was it von Daniken's Chariot of the Gods? He'd read the Book of Enoch, the Book of Urantia, whatever was out there at the time, he had read it. And he had different theories. He was fine if we were, you know, created by some ancient race. He was fine. He thought that, yes, aliens were working in the background to help humanity and stop us from blowing ourselves. He certainly thought, and he was very open, he thought that the White House and the Vatican were hiding things. They had more information than what they were telling. Really, nothing has changed, right? We're still kind of in the dark, aren't we, even today? And he didn't even have the internet. He just had books and his intuition. And so he was fine with these ideas. And again, he once told this girl that he was an alien being from the planet, from the ninth moon of Jupiter. And he said he'd come here on a mission. Now, the problem with this one is I don't know if he was trying to just, you know, shit post her and pull her leg, because he was a joker, and he had a sense of humor, and he liked to just say sometimes strange tall tales. Or was he being serious? I don't know. But he was very open about the whole alien thing, and he had three verified UFO experiences. There's many that other people have said, but I found three that I can say were true, because he was not alone. He had his bodyguards around him, he had his family around him. So these things, one, of course, and they're all varied, because God forbid these things appear to us like just one and say, this is what we look like. One was, of course, the weird lights that go in a pattern across the sky. And of course, when it happened, and this was in the Arizona desert, same questions we asked ourselves. One guy was like, could this be government tech that they haven't shared with us? And Elvis is like, no, 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 this is too advanced. And somebody else, what it might be. And of course, you know, they sit there and argue in the desert about the same thing. The other one was the sort of flying saucers across the sky, and the other one was this light that covered his house when he was living in Hollywood, or his Hollywood house, and kind of just spread and just sort of like an overlook, like inspecting the area, and went and so forth. So he did have those experiences. So, and of course, his One of his favorite movies was 2001: A Space Odyssey. He would start his most of his concerts with "Thus Spake Zarathustra," the famous song from 2001: Space Odyssey. Although his favorite movie was Doctor Strangelove. That was his all-time favorite movie.
I think it's so funny because uh, Elvis, in very many ways, laid the foundation for the future of the music industry. And Robert Johnson, being the sort of the father of rock and roll, right? This is the classic story of, I believe he was a blues musician who ends up, having this experience allegedly of selling his soul to the devil at a set of crossroads. And now this man, uh, he goes to lay the foundations for everything that rock and roll does in the future. And then you look at Elvis, another one of these characters where you can say his influence um, very much shaped the music world from his time going forward. But he also, and obviously because of those issues with the crossroads and selling your soul with Robert Johnson, uh, Elvis also laid the foundation for the way that the occult would sort of play a role in the music industry. And I wonder if the big musicians that followed that are also synonymous with the occult, did they emulate Elvis and his interests? Did Elvis marry these worlds together, the music and the occult, in a way that other artists would emulate in the future? Or is there an argument for these realms have always been married? And when we see
Well,
Elvis having a relationship with it, we're seeing something that has always been happening, just like shamans and their rituals and the relationship that music plays within those in the tribes. Are we just seeing a modernized version of it? And with people like Elvis or people like the Beatles or people like Robert Johnson, we're seeing um, not something that's unique to them, just highlighted in them, but is really just a an image of a relationship that's always been there.
well, I think we have to couch it in terms of shamanism. As somebody once said, the tribe needs the shaman. That's a person that is a spiritual troubleshooter for the tribe. He's a psychologist for the tribe. It's almost like that's the person that handles the egregore of the tribe. Goes to the underworld for answers. Has all the medicine to teach to help people and all that. But the shaman is always at the edge of town because people want their shaman, but they're also afraid of their shaman. It's on the liminal places. So with that in mind, that would be Elvis on the edge, but this country needed him for their psyche. Now, going back to rock was basically gospel music, uh, weaponized or on steroids or something like that. Again, and this gospel, and we're not talking about the gospel music you think. We're talking this Pentecostal shamanistic experiential thing. It is about altered states of mind and communing with higher beings, whether it's, call it the Holy Spirit, call it Dionysus, call it Hermes. It doesn't matter. It is other that takes you and expands your consciousness and can heal your body and transform your very soul. That is rock and roll. And also the blues. We also have to think that the blues, as I write in my book, the blues really carries this sort of African animistic power and these spirits and this vibe and mixes it with American literature. And the blues always talks about the devil, but is not talking about the Christian Bible devil, this sort of, sadistic, Mr. Evil, kind of, this is more of a trickster being. This is more like Loki. You can make deals, but you're also going to get burned. And this figure is a trickster. He will help you, but he will drive you crazy. He will, he's everywhere and he's nowhere. He's always in the liminal spaces. He's always at the crossroads. And Hecate, Krishna, Hermes, all these other famous trickster spirits, they are at the crossroads, the liminal spaces, the place where you get inspiration, where you get innovation. The Nephilim might be tricksters too, or the Watchers at least might be tricksters, helpers of humanity, but doomers of humanity. When Prometheus gives fire from the gods, fire is going to help you, but it's going to burn your ass. So it's that mixed bag that only we humans get to have from these tricksters, and that include the blues tricksters, and of course they can include too the Holy Spirit and gospel, because being enlightened or saved usually means, as Jesus said, they're going to crucify your ass. The world will hate you for being awakened. So Elvis was in this place where he was equally in Memphis and in Tupelo, where he was equally influenced. And the movie, Bart Luhrmann's movie, shows that very well. He goes to a blues place and then he goes to a church. So he had blues and he had gospel. He had the shamanistic power, and even he used to say, I carry heaven and hell, and I must stand between it so that I can be powerful. I mean, he said it himself. And this stuff really came together and became rock and roll. And again, he wasn't alone. Others who came from Pentecostal churches, again, B.B. King, Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins. I mean, the founders of rock were these Christian wild mystics as much as anything. And Elvis was the most famous of them, but they all had this huge contribution. And I would contend that rock is shamanistic. As I was telling a friend, if you ain't gripped by the Holy Spirit, you ain't doing rock right. And all of us see that. I mean, we see our favorite musicians, whether it's Jimmy Page or Prince or something, just going on the altered stage of mind, the Grateful Dead, while they're on stage, because again, they are really trying to tap into this ancient mystery religion shamanistic vibe and that power, and create energies and egregores to commune with their audience. And many people have done it well, but I don't think anybody ever did it better than Elvis.
And there's so much there. So
Read the book. It'll make
it's
sense.
it's endlessly interesting, and I find this mixture of these artists communing with these entities that is an endless well of interesting information to draw from, right? So we
Oh, and
have
let me stop you there. Don't forget, Robert Johnson was just some loser. He did disappear, and he did appear with this guitar talent that the world had never seen, that transformed the world. So it makes you wonder, where the hell did that dude go? Same with Elvis. This truck driver just comes into Sun Record Studios like, well, could I record something? Didn't know how to read music, didn't know, barely played the guitar. Something strange was going on there.
very similar story with the gentleman who sang Somewhere Over the Rainbow, where he
Mm,
just I think he either hustled his way to the recording studio, or he called them in and just frantically insisted that they record this piece, and then all in one take. I forget his name. Tremendous song. The big Hawaiian fella goes in and sings "Somewhere Over the Rainbow" in one take, and it becomes
wow.
immortalized essentially in Hawaiian culture forever afterwards as sort of a demigod. But these characters, right? So you have Robert, he sells his soul potentially for musical
Yeah.
talent. Bob Dylan, there's a famous interview, I don't know if it was on 60 Minutes or whatever it was, where Bob Dylan is talking about how he was asked, "Why are you still touring?" And he said, "Because he still has to pay his dues." And
Yeah.
the person interviewing said, "Your dues to who?" And he said, "The king of this realm and a realm you can't see." Right? And there's always this sell your soul thing. And then before that, it was the muses, right? That's where you're getting your inspiration from.
No.
That's where your ideas come from. Almost this, I had a conversation with a clinical psychologist of 30 years, um, who he came to the conclusion after dealing with schizophrenia patients in a psych ward, which schizophrenia and shamanism, it's like back in the day we
No,
would have
no,
given
no.
them a place amongst society, and instead now they're ostracized and failed by the medical industry. But he came to the conclusion, even though he's a licensed doctor, that they were being influenced by outside entities. And you mentioned before, right? These trickster entities like Hermes and things like this. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that I've been going down this rabbit hole lately, thanks to one of my good buddies, Paul, of the YouTube channel Understanding Conspiracy, who has an excellent theory, well-researched theory laid out before him that he presents in a fantastic way. I highly recommend people go check him out. That the Nephilim, like we mentioned before, actually look like clowns, and when people do dimethyltryptamine, this is one aspect of what he says that always sticks with me. They commune with machine elves or something of that nature, but these things are always described as looking like jesters and being
Mm,
tricksters in nature, right? And when you think about reeling it all the way back to where we just spoke about this unfortunate demise that many of our favorite celebrities, musicians in particular, will meet, this dark spiral that ends up happening, it always to me feels like, especially the ones who said they sold their soul or something of that nature, something has come to collect. Something tricked them into a bad deal that wasn't always good. And I'm not saying that that's what happened with um, Elvis, but like Eminem in particular has a famous song where he talks about. Um, he's got two songs, and I think there's details in both songs that are very interesting. One of them is called 3 a.m. Um, and he sings from his perspective, and then in a deeper voice that's been auto-tuned, he sings from the perspective of the entity that he sold his soul to and describes the deal that he made, which was
mm.
fame and fortune, and respect, and to be allowed to see his daughters grow. And then after that, that this thing would come and collect. And he called it Rain Man. And that's context from another song, I believe. And Rain Man, there is a bit of lore about him. Is this entity, and I forget the nature of the entity. I want to say he's one of these globes, the 13th globes of Yog Sothoth. I could be entirely wrong on that. But Rain Man is an entity. There's various entities you can make various deals with. This one in particular, uh, he traffics in fame and money. And so this is the entity that Eminem claims to deal with. And there is always this idea that this is purely um, a colorful metaphor. What purpose this colorful metaphor serves, I struggle to try to. It seems like a pretty straightforward thing to me. It's some people who commune with these entities, and I imagine there's a fine line that you can walk. You can commune with them, maybe, and you cannot get sucked into a bad deal, but the nature of what they want is to grant you something for something else in return. And sometimes I get to speculating as to whether or not if you make a deal with a negative thing, well, its goal ultimately, after it gives you what you want, is these are energetic beings. And I know this is going to a real wild place, but we're talking about esoteric Elvis here. And so, in my opinion, um, there are entities that are negative in nature and they feed off negative energy. And so, how do they manifest this negative energy from you? Well, they point you in a direction that ultimately gives you what you want, but also sends you burning in flames, and they feed off of your negative energy all the way down. I don't know that this is what happened with Elvis, and to whatever extent, but we have an integral relationship, this thing that's been parallel with humanity for a long time of making deals with entity. It's a quid pro quo. They give us something, they want something in return, and often they're described as tricksters. And maybe that name doesn't necessarily matter. Hermes, the Nephilim, the DMT elves, maybe that's not necessarily as important as the fact that they do seem to exist in one form or the other. And people that are much more accomplished than myself uh, would swear by it, that this is certainly a part. And going back to Greek and Roman times, the muses were certainly something that was alive and well in the culture. We call it mythology nowadays, but people channeled them to create great works of art. And here we are today by different names, but and they're not shamans, they're celebrities, but they're still channeling the muses, the Nephilim, whatever it is, and they're making great works of art at some sort of cost to their own health, it seems, by the end of the road.
Maybe, maybe. I mean, I think whether it's the tricksters or John Keel's the Mothman, one thing you have to remember is they don't have they don't have human morality. You're just going to go crazy trying to figure them out. So, I mean, again, I think Elvis certainly was looking at not left hand path, but certainly right hand path things. So, And again, the view of the trickster from Robert Johnson to Elvis, this was the spirit of the blues, the spirit of gospel. This was a folkloric sort of entity and place you went. So I don't know. We'd have to go back to the 50s. And again, and also too, when you listen to those old blues songs, a lot of them do beat the devil. They do beat the devil. You know, you can get that gold fiddle, as the song says.
Right, a dangerous game to play, but there are certainly anecdotal stories of the battle being won. Yeah, the devil went down to
Yeah.
Georgia being one of them. Uh, and I mean, man, imagine the glory in that, right? No risk, no reward at the highest levels. You
Maybe they
mentioned
just
early
want
on,
good art. Maybe that's all they care about. Make good art. We want to make a better aesthetic in this universe.
maybe things are too dull and drab. So
Yeah,
you
I mean,
mentioned
nobody
earlier.
forced Elvis to do drugs, and nobody forced Robert Johnson to. Oh, he that either sex, he died of some sex disease or overdose. Nobody forced him. We can blame the devil all day, but come on.
Well, that's the thing too about these entities. One of the things that I've learned throughout my research is that there seems to be, um, you're right, nobody's forced. There seems to be a requirement of permission, a certain amount of permission that has to be granted to these things. It goes back to almost the um, the story of the vampires and how the vampires need to be invited in, and so there seems to be rules that these spirits or these entities, these muses, these Nephilim, whatever it is, they play by a rule, and that rule, one of them at least, is that they have to be invited in. Otherwise, they can't operate. And so, one of the things you mentioned before that is very fascinating to me is this idea, and I wonder if there's anything else you could tell us in regards to like Elvis and this knowledge of his own demise coming, that it was going to happen. He was going to be ascending. I mean, I wonder how it is he knew that, what keyed him into that, why he was so okay with it. I mean, we can certainly speculate. He thinks there's another uh, plane of existence, which I would agree with. And I'm sure that gives him great comfort. Maybe he knows what his role in this plane is going to be, the nature of it. Um, but is there any other information you have in regards to when did he start to know this?
He'd always talked about dying young, but again, that could just be histrionics from young musicians and young people in general. But towards the end, and yes, his health was getting worse and everything was getting worse, but he still kept at it with his spirituality. He still kept doing concerts. He was, a good fiance to Ginger. He was still doing all his commitments to friends. It wasn't like he was, yeah, he would go to times where he would feel very depressed and he would stay in a room and light these candles, and he would start orating his ancestors, a very strange ritual that he sort of made up. And yeah, sometimes he wanted to be alone, but that was Elvis was known to go through periods of isolation where he just didn't want to deal with people. But there were certainly certain hints, like again telling his stepbrother 2 days before, I'm going to hire a plane. One of his best friends, he for some reason took him somewhere and had all these legal documents signed, which is something that Elvis had never done in their whatever 20 years of French, because he just didn't care. Whatever he just snapped his finger. But and he said something, he said the question about he would be with the angels or something, and his friend just had a really bad premonition. Before he died, he would drive to Tupelo, which is about an hour and a half from Memphis, and go visit his old house. And he would go there at night with a flashlight and look under the house and tell his friend, I'm looking for my marbles as a kid. Very strange thing, like you're going to the past to recover something. And there was all these other hints that were going around that he knew it was his time, and he didn't care. Death was not something that worried him at all. He understood how the universe worked. And now the
You're
other
going
thing
to
too is even beyond the devil, when of course for this book I had to do a lot of research on shamanism. It is very much a commonality, especially in the shamanism of the North and South Pole, the Inuit and people in the Antarctica. A shaman doing all that magic and art. Shamans are musicians too for the tribe. There are the poets, they take care of the mental health of the tribe. They start breaking down pretty early. So it's common for shamans to really start using drugs to keep their energy up and to be able to function. And what happens in these tribes is that you get this you get this kind of middle-aged, broken down drug addict shaman who's still doing his job for the tribe, but he just looks, in bad shape, out of this world, but he's still there. So Elvis kind of follows that pattern because he just kept, he kept going even though his body and his mind was just completely collapsing.
This is gonna sound ridiculous, but this is the perception I had, especially when I was younger, of Elvis and his death was like basically that he died on the toilet and that and of course this is my mother telling me this. I'm very yeah, I said, why did he die? Why did he die on the toilet? She said something to the effect of his love for like um peanut butter banana sandwiches. I don't even know if that's true. If Elvis ever loved, he did love peanut butter banana. I don't blame him. They're
He did.
delicious. I get it. And so she said, "Oh well, it messed his stomach up, and something happened." Clearly not the case. What can you tell us about his death, the circumstances of his death? What the police found when they found him? You said that there was almost not a ritualistic, I don't wanna say that that's what you mentioned, but there was a different aspect of his death that you thought was significant, and I'm wondering you could tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's many theories. Nobody agrees how he died. I think Vernon won't let the autopsy report come out till like 2027, his father after he died. So we'll know in a few years. I guess we'll know. So I don't even want to speculate drugs, heart attack. He had a lot of ailments, but it certainly was ritualistic. I mean, especially when you look at that day. I mean, he woke up or at somewhere early in the morning wanted to play racquetball, was walking out with some friends, and his friends were like, "Oh, it's raining," and he did this thing he always did. It, "Oh, I'll take care of it," and he waved his hand, and the clouds parted, and that happened many times. He played racquetball. Then he went on playing songs that had blue, like "Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain." Blue was Elvis's color of mysticism. Whenever he had a mystical experience, he would see blue. That was just his thing. He wore blue pajamas when he went to the bathroom. Um, and also, you have to remember that in his life, somebody that big never had any privacy. Even in his bedroom, there was somebody right out the door. One of the places he would do studies and rituals was the bathroom because sometimes he could spend 4 hours reading with a friend and meditating in prayer because that was the only place in Graceland or anywhere else where he would have complete solitude, pretty much. It was very hard. So he went to the bathroom, and again, he was on his throne, blue. Memphis is Egyptian for the land between two worlds, two lands, crossroads right there. He was wearing his Egyptian ankh, which he had one, but he was wearing it that day. Blue pajamas, and the book. The book he was reading when he died was The Scientific Quest for the Face of Jesus. So get it symbolically, I'm going to meet Jesus. And there's other
Wow.
hints. I can't think of them on top of my head, but when you look at them and his predictions, this was some sort of shamanistic Egyptian hermetic ritual of him leaving the world. So he knew it.
Very interesting. That's there's it's so strange to me, just going back to what I said earlier, that this information isn't we have so much about, what is it, like the Beatles, basically, I think they went to India. Right, they did a lot of traveling, they got immersed in psychedelics, their music changed, dramatically. I don't did we see a sort of pivot in Elvis's music at all in the way that we saw in the Beatles?
No, no, he never wrote a single song. For him, again, it was about tapping into energies. He wanted to tap into these old blues and gospel energies That's what he wanted, and use him as rich. I mean, a shaman doesn't create anything. John Dee didn't create anything. Aleister Crowley didn't. They tap into the underworld. They grab the materials around them, and then they present them to the audience. So that's what he wanted. His favorite music was gospel music. He loved doing gospel albums, but for him, it was always a gut thing. What can I do and make it my own and present it to the world? So he only has like two social songs, like If I Can Dream and In the Ghetto. But with him, it was always, everything with Elvis was almost pretty much instinctual. He followed his intuition wherever he went and always worked out for him.
It's funny because I was made to believe, and I'm sure this is true to some extent, that it was like Elvis's provocative nature and hip thrusting that got him in an incredible amount of trouble. This happening at a time where overt displays of sexuality on stage maybe weren't
Well, it
well
did,
received
yeah,
by the public. And
certainly.
it seems like they were missing the mark. There was a whole other there was a whole other aspect of Elvis that maybe the church could have been upset with, or conservatives could have been upset with, religious folk. But instead, they were aiming at the hip thrusting, and it's funny because it just seems like, man, did they miss the mark?
Yeah, yeah. But again, I think it was just his whole persona was a threat. He was changed. The one thing a trickster does is he is the agent of change. He comes at you and says, your life is going to change whether you like it or not. Whether Loki appears in your world or Hermes or the Watchers or the Mothmen, they're like, we're not human. We don't have human morality, but we can tell you things are going to change. Even in Native American lore, the coyote, the beaver, the moon, they are called the changers. And that's good because as humans, we don't want to change. We don't want to innovate or grow or evolve. We're happy being just nice little monkeys or cattle. It's the trickster and the shaman that says, no, we can be better. It's going to cost, it's going to hurt, but change will bring something new. And it's just the way it is with humans. Sorry.
Seems to me that the difference between uh, the shaman, the modern day shaman, being maybe the musician, um, the difference between that person and the schizophrenic might just be charisma. Charisma and the ability to sort of still function on a normal level instead of allowing these experiences to overwhelm you. Because as I expressed before, the research that I've been doing and the guests that I had on recently, um, there's a lot of evidence, in my opinion, that the voices that schizophrenics hear are actually maybe the same thing you could have called muses or things like that back in the day. But the problem is the experience is so jarring for this person that may actually be closer to the spiritual realm than the average person that it breaks them down. Or maybe it's not as intense, and maybe the person is charismatic and strong enough to kind of compartmentalize these things and not lose sight of the fact that um, they're still in control ultimately. And that's what makes or breaks, turns you either celebrity or turns you into an unfortunate person that the medical industry fails. And it seems like Elvis and these big characters, um, they sort of mastered those experiences and actually use them as an oar, right, to guide their boat and then become these sort of cultural phenomenons. Miguel, I actually have to wrap up soon. I'm wondering if there's anywhere that you want to land this ship in particular.
No, that's it. I think that's it. I think we covered. There's so much more, but it's a good start. But yeah, go to thegodabovegod.com. If your listeners want an experience, go listen to American Trilogy or How Great Thou Art, his more cheesy gospel music. Go outside in the woods or sit alone. I think people have had mystical experiences listening to those songs. You might have one too.
Well, Miguel, thank you for your time. It's a completely fascinating subject. I encourage the audience to go and check out your work. Also, listen to other appearances on other shows that you've been on. This Elvis thing is actually very big, and I think that it mirrors, maybe not mirrors, maybe the other circumstances mirror Elvis's impact on culture, and that what we see now from all these various celebrities are almost smaller pebbles than Elvis that are tossed into a big lake. Elvis was sort of a boulder, and it's the same effect, just on a smaller scale. What we're seeing today with this occultism in the music industry and these celebrities and how they utilize it to become almost demigods in our society. Uh, Miguel, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it, and to the audience, thank you guys for listening. Don't forget to go and follow Nephilim Death Squad on YouTube and also on Rumble. Once again, I'm saying this because we're soon going to be exclusively streaming Nephilim Death Squad. It'll no longer be on the Ravens Watch on YouTube, and so we want to move the audience over there to the best of our abilities. So that way, when we start streaming on there, nobody's left behind looking at the other YouTube channels and going, "What the heck's going on?" So Miguel, once again, thank you very much, and to the audience, have a good night,
Thank
guys.
you. Take care, guys. Thank you.